Hi, this is Robin from Virginia, and you're listening to Melissa Bird on Two Broads Talking Politics.
Are you listening?
Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and I am joined today by Dr. Melissa Bird, who is a life coach and speaker and author. Hello, Melissa.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm really, really well. The sun is shining in Oregon today, which, is sometimes a miracle.
Yeah, not so much in Chicago today, but it's getting warmer, so.
That's nice.
Yeah. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and your relationship with the politics of today?
I got my start in politics when I was actually getting my master's degree in social work in 2003. And my goodness, that's been a long time. And and I was doing research on homeless youth in Utah. And this was back when we weren't talking about homeless youth. We were barely starting to talk about them as a population. And I did the first research in Utah on homeless youth. And then the way our law was written, you could not shelter a youth for longer than 8 hours without parental consent or emancipation, which you can imagine created some barriers to care. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote the Emancipation of a Minor law for Utah on my dining room table while listening to Metallica. And I called a legislator that I knew, and I said, hey, I think I just wrote a bill. Would you be willing to look at it? And her name was Roz McGee, and she said, sure. And I sent it to her to call me back within 5 minutes. And this was like when email was slower, right? We were still using Yahoo and AOL. She called me back right away, and she said, you wrote a law. And I said, I did. She goes, yeah. And I said, well, what do I do now? And she said, well, now we're going to get it passed. And I was like, okay, how does that work? And so I had to teach myself how to lobby. And I taught myself how a bill became a law in Utah. And I got to know people up at the Utah State Legislature. And 2 years later, I had an actual law for real. I passed it into law 2 years later. I built a community coalition. Roz guided me along the way, but for the most part, she was like, you need to build a coalition and you need to bring people around this issue. And so I did. And it was amazing. And so that was my foray into politics as a younger, much younger social worker. And then I ended up doing some political work for Equality Utah, the state's LGBT Political Action Committee. And then I got hired by Planned Parenthood of Utah to be their VP of Public Policy. And so I used to lobby the Utah State Legislature about reproductive justice.
Excellent. And so what you're doing now, your work in coaching and speaking, what's your sort of your focus, your goal in the work that you're doing?
So one of the things that I really realized when I was working at the Utah State Legislature and working as a lobbyist was that when women tell their stories, well, when anyone tells their stories, but in particular, people who are marginalized, the LGBT community or women tell their stories to their elected officials about how the decisions they're making directly impact their lives, it changes how legislation is made. And even in really combative, sort of seemingly hostile legislatures, when people intimately describe how laws are going to impact their families, their partners, and how those things work, it changes the course of policymaking. And so my whole goal with my coaching and the work that I'm doing now is, even if you don't want to be involved in politics, and even if you don't want to run for office, really finding your voice and finding your clear message that you can give to people in your own community, I think is how we're going to make a difference in this nation going forward. And I feel like if more women in particular and people in general are given permission to use their voices to stand up and tell their stories, it's going to change the course of how we do engage in policy making at a local level. And so my whole goal with my coaching and the work that I do is to really help people elevate their voices and figure out what their messages are to make a difference in their community. And if it's not in politics, then maybe it's in finding clean socks and underwear for homeless people, or We have a woman in our community who has worked with me and done a workshop with me who just ended up buying a home so that we can house homeless women. And that just comes from her passion. And I feel like if we can tap into our passion and really hone in on what lights us on fire and tell those stories, it's going to change the face of politics.
Have you seen a change in the past 2+ years in the willingness of women to speak up, to tell their stories? Have you seen a change in the way that it's received?
I think that a lot has changed in the last 2 years. Some of it is horrifying and some of it is really inspiring. I really feel like definitely women are speaking up, but I also feel like there is still a fear of what will happen when we do. And I've actually been recently talking about imposter syndrome and how women in particular think that they have to be given permission to speak up. And I feel like the Me Too movement, in some ways, in the way it exploded was in some ways that permission. But we're being silenced again on a whole nother level. I mean, just being called host bodies by the legislatures recently it's a way of using language to get us to shush. So while I feel like women are really speaking up more now than ever before, I also feel like it comes with a certain set of fear and trepidation that we still have to overcome. And I feel like that's why giving explicit permission to tell our stories and to speak about our experiences, I think has to be given all across the nation so we can really make an impact at a local level.
I think this is something we're seeing more and more with abortion in particular, that people are talking about their abortions, talking about why they chose to have them. What are some of the other ways that you're seeing that? That's the one that sort of immediately has come to my mind because I've had friends tell such personal stories. But what are some of the other areas that you think that maybe we still have some room to grow with stories that people should be telling?
I think there are a lot of different opportunities to talk about experiences that we may be having. The other stigmatized experiences are around using food stamps and other forms of support to support our families. Telling the stories of how we are, as families and as women, making sure that we are being really creative and taking care of our kids, especially. I know there's still a lot of stigma around the use of food stamps in families, and many veteran families are on food stamps, but we never talk about that publicly. And we hear all the time about these awful entitlement programs, and this whole stigma around the welfare queen, which still exists, and sort of these crappy notions of what it means to use resources so that you can help feed your families and continue to not just survive, but also to have the ability to potentially thrive eventually. If we could get through the stigma of talking about how many of us, why we use social services to enhance our well-being so that we can move forward in difficult times, I think is going to become critical, because more and more people are using those programs because of the way the economy is right now.
You have a workshop you do called Fanning the Flames. Could you talk a little bit about what inspired that and what it's all about?
I love fanning the flames. I finished my PhD in 2017, and I knew I didn't want to go into academia. That wasn't the purpose of the PhD. What I really wanted to do was be able to highlight women's stories, and so that's why I went and got a PhD. That, and I wanted my family to call me doctor, so that backfired horribly because my kids still won't call me Dr. Mom, but that's okay. But I started fanning the flames because I had a lot of people coming to me saying, I'm really excited about this. I'm really passionate about this. This really lights me on fire, but I have no idea what to do, Missy. Can you help me? And so I had all these friends of mine in the community coming to me and online too. And I thought, wow, what if I could create something, that would give people in local communities and local towns the opportunity to tap into their passion, figure out what lights them up, and then go out and do that thing in their community. And so originally my friend Brianna Morgan and I wrote we called it Marginalize No More, and we wrote it right after the election. And that has morphed into Fanning the Flames. And Fanning the Flames on the Ground is a 2-hour workshop that I'm doing all over the country. So I'm getting ready to go all over the country so I can do it anywhere, basically. I've done it everywhere, and I'm doing it more to really bring together a room full of women to give them the tools and the resources they need to figure out what exactly it is that lights them on fire so that they can engage in action around that in their communities. And then I also have Fanning the Flames Online, which is a series of workbooks and videos that helps people walk through, so they have it forever. So if you purchase it online, it's yours forever. And the workbooks and the videos really help you, give you the tools to figure out what really brings you joy and what you really want to take action on, so you can do that in your own neighborhoods and your own communities, because I feel like that's really where change is going to start. I think that there's so many of us that are looking around at our neighborhoods and our friends and the people that we're surrounded by and thinking, I think there's a lot of ways that we could do this better, and I want to help.
So I know this isn't the sort of area of what you do, but talk to me about raising kids and in this political world and helping our kids find their voices early.
Oh, I love that you asked this question, because it kind of is what I do. I mean, I did major in early childhood development. I did used to teach preschool once upon a time. So I actually just moderated a panel for working moms in the graphic design industry, of all things, last week in Portland. And one of the things that I asked the panelists and that we talked about as a group was the thing that we were proudest of as mothers. And the thing that I am the most proud of is that I am raising feminist children. And it's been a process, because their dad is an Army man. And so his perspective on the world, while he is, I think Jim would consider himself a feminist, he's got this old school way of thinking that he grew up with because he was in the Army for most of his life. And so it's been really fantastic to look at Gwen and Sean and Caitlin. So our two older ones are girls, and then Sean is our little boy, and how they see injustice and the way they speak up about it, I think is really lovely. And we have intentional conversations about those things. For example, my son wanted a pink coat for his parka this year. My husband, Jim, was not a fan of the pink coat idea, and that's putting it so mildly. And we had to navigate a conversation about why it was okay for boys to wear pink. And it was really fascinating, because the girls were like, well, no, duh. And the girls were with Jim were like, well, I wear blue all the time. I don't understand what the problem is. And they really pushed back with him and were like, why is this any different? So it's kind of amazing, to help our children see that they have a voice in what they are witnessing and experiencing. We don't own a television, so they're not exposed to the news and the stuff that you normally see on TV. But they definitely see injustice in the world. When Sean was 5, we were driving in downtown Anaheim, actually. And he just looked at me and he goes, Mom, how come white men are so mean to black women? And I was like, wow, where'd you see that? And he said, I see it all the time, every day. So in his little world, just watching the window outside the car, he's witnessing things that I'm not even catching because I'm driving, right? And so we think that kids don't see things, or that we're somehow shielding them from everything that's going on. And that is very simply untrue. And we have to acknowledge that our kids have answers to these problems too. And it's really important to ask the question.
Do you find yourself as a mom drawing some of your inspiration for why you should find your voice, why you should be more vocal, because you want to show that to your kids? I mean, I think that's something I have found myself doing, certainly when I went through therapy for anxiety. One of the things I was thinking was, I need to not be anxious because that's what I shouldn't be modeling for my children. Or I need to overcome it, figure out ways to deal with it so that that's the model I'm showing my children. But I think also with being outspoken, with wanting to fight for the things I want to fight for, I see that sort of as a mom thinking, not just am I doing this for myself, but I'm doing this to show my children that this is the way to interact in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I've never really, as a mom, I've never really not had my voice, but I feel like now more than ever, especially with, I'm raising a teenage daughter. I'm raising little people that are going to turn into teenagers someday. Giving them, modeling for them what happens when you take care of yourself and ask for things has been really fascinating. I didn't actually think they'd listen to the words that come out of my mouth, but the other day, our oldest daughter called. She's 17, and she said, I asked, there's some famous guy who she really likes, and he's got a DJ. And she said that she connected with his DJ on Instagram and asked her to come and DJ their prom, and she said yes. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so proud of you. And she goes, well, you're always saying all the time you should just ask for whatever you want, because the only way you're going to get what you want is to ask for it. And I'm like, oh, so I've been like modeling, asking very famous people to, for example, to come on my Facebook Lives, or like taking all these risks in my own life, and they're watching me do it, and they're doing the same thing. They just don't like to tell us about it, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're going to model no matter what it is we give them. So if we are modeling for them that when we see an injustice, we stand out about it. When we, when something bothers us, we call our elected officials. Like, they all know how to call their elected officials, and they're only 8, 11, and 17. But they know that that's just something that you do normally. Like, that's a practice we have at our house, that we are nice to people, even if we don't know them. Like, all of these things that I try and model, just that come out of me naturally. Kids are always watching, and I just think it's a real testament for us to realize that it doesn't matter what we do. They're still going to model that behavior, but they're not going to tell us about. That's the key, especially for teenagers. They're not going to tell you what they're doing.
I think what I have somehow modeled to my kids in this, like reaching out to famous people on Instagram is, they'll be like, well, let's just send this video to Hillary Clinton. Okay. Yeah. we can try. Why not?
Yeah, why not? I mean, what the heck?
Talk to me some about your coaching and the kinds of things you work with people on when you're coaching them.
I tumbled into the coaching thing because I had a friend of mine on Facebook who was like, do you do any coaching? Because I really want you to be my coach. And so I called my coach and I was like, what is this deal with coaching? And she's like, well, Missy, you have a PhD. You may as well go for it. And I was like, oh, okay. And of course, my background's all in social work. So I do have a background in community organizing and community building and working with people. So that's kind of amazing. But I started coaching, and I really realized as I was working with the women that I initially started working with, that they all, they were varied in background. So it wasn't like there's this whole thing in coaching where they're like, find your ideal client and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like looking at my clients going, they're not one of them is similar, until I really peeled away the layers of the onion and got down to every single one of those women. Every woman that I work with wants to express herself somehow, whether it's in her business or in writing or in creating a nonprofit or in telling elected officials what they think is crap, or what's really good, or, they all want to find a voice. And I think that is, if there's anything we could call good out of the 2016 election and what's happening right now in 2019, I think it might be that. I think it might be that women are finally like, you know what? I'm going to say whatever the hell it is I want to say, and I need someone to help me find the tools to do just that. And so that's really what I would do is I build my coaching practice around helping women really hone in on where they feel lost or where they feel like they cannot speak, to create opportunities for them to take the risk to talk about what it is that they want out of their lives.
And is the coaching something that you do over the phone, online? How does that work? Do people need to be local to you, or can they be farther away?
They can be anywhere. I coach over the phone because I like talking on the phone, because I'm a child of the 80s, and there's nothing I love more than talking on the phone. I adore it. I just think it's great. That's why I like doing podcasts too, because I feel like I'm talking on the phone. I love being on the phone. And then I also do my coaching clients. I also do group coaching. So one of the things that I do is I bring groups of women together who, with each of their ideas, and then I tailor a coaching group around their community. So they don't have to be from the same community, but I do group coaching where each person brings sort of a project or something that they want to work on to the table, and then I give them the tools to sort of figure out how to elevate their soapbox and make their dream a reality. Sometimes I work with women for 6 months. Sometimes I work with them for 3 months. Sometimes I just work with them for an hour. And I will work with men sometimes too. If they've got a project they want to work on or something where they can't just figure out exactly how to hone in on what their message is, then I do that too. It's super fun. I love it. It's the most fun ever.
I like people that love their job.
I was actually just thinking, I don't think there is anything else I could possibly ever do. Like, I was like, I could. Nope, I can't. I love my job so much that I don't ever want to leave it.
So you had a piece recently in Rant Media about being successful in activism. What inspired that? What was your thinking when you were thinking about, sort of how to help people in their activism in sort of a really concrete way?
Well, so I want to take everything I've learned from personally engaging in advocacy as well as teaching. So for years, I taught at the university level. I taught social justice advocacy and policy. And I wanted to take everything that I've learned from my students, from teaching, from doing the work myself, and take some of those core lessons and give it to other people. So that's actually the first in a series of 5 articles that I have coming out with Rant, talking about how to engage in activism from a very intentional space. One of the things that I think is a little bit scary to me is this all or nothing approach to advocacy and taking action. There is no all or nothing approach when you're talking about communicating with other human beings about things that make you feel passionate and make you feel like your life is at stake. And I think that there are definite tools that we can use and highlight, which is really what I went for in that Rant article, that push us a little bit beyond the all or nothing approach to engaging in advocacy. Because not everyone's going to want to march, not everyone wants to yell, and not everyone wants to be quiet. Like, there's a lot of room and space for an opportunity for us expressing ourselves how we need to. And the critical thing, and the thing that I'm actually getting the most feedback on that Rant article, is engaging in radical welcome and this idea and this notion of actually talking to people who don't agree with us. And that is something I practice. I don't just preach it. I practice it regularly. I have a very conservative friend who she and I do Facebook Lives once a month. And we model how to have difficult conversations about things that we absolutely do not agree on. And sometimes there's a lot of crying between the two of us. And it's amazing what happens.
I really love this idea of talking to to people who don't agree with us. I mean, I find myself, I live in such a bubble, I think, and I realize sometimes I don't even know a lot of people whose ideas, whose values, whose thoughts are different than mine. And I think it is so valuable to think about it. And it's so easy to sort of demonize, quote unquote, the other side and think of everything as sort of a fight, a battle, and really we're all just people. And so I think that's super valuable.
One of the things that I learned when I was working at the Utah legislature, and I'm lobbying for Planned Parenthood, and at the time I was married to a woman, and so like I was all the things that Utah was not a fan of at that moment. And one of the things that I learned, that I realized, was that the people who were opposing my legislation or opposing what I stood for are equally as passionate about that as I am. So the people on the anti-choice side of the world are equally as passionate about that as I am as a pro-choice bisexual woman, right? And so we have to recognize that their passions are equal to ours, and that means we have to talk to them from a level that does not demonize them, but actually helps them see reason. And I believe that's what's missing right now. And I believe that's what we can get back, is talking to people about how they feel. And you're right. We all live in an echo chamber. I mean, for the most part, most of my friends are friends that reinforce the values and ideals that I hold dear, just like most of us. Most of the people that I see on Facebook are people who reflect my feelings and beliefs. But I have a core group of humans that I have surrounded myself with who I would definitely call my true friends, who do not think like I do at all, and who are deeply conservative Republican people who don't have the same ideas about many things. But there are spots where we come together on issues like contraception and gun control and parenting and being a mom and the environment and a lot of other spaces where we think that there's no common ground, but there's always common ground. And if we can recognize the passion in people who seemingly oppose us, and also look for, it's an old suffrage playbook tactic where when they were pushing for the right to vote, when they were looking at that, they had note cards with information about the elected officials that they were calling, about where they summered and where they wintered and who their dogs were and who their children were and where they went to school. And that's where they started the conversation. Oh, I noticed you summered in the Hamptons. So did I. And that's where the conversation starts. Lobbying and advocacy is not about, lobbying in particular is not about money and K Street and all of the awful things we think about lobbying. Lobbying is all about building relationships. And so if you have the opportunity to connect with the elected officials in your area, even if they are not, you did not vote for them or they don't support you, but you connect with them on a human level, that's where change takes place, because people don't do that. And then they've heard from you and they know who you are. So when you need something, they're more likely to work for you.
Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we talk about?
I really cannot believe I'm saying this, but I really want people to stop being so damn mean to each other. I just think that the cruelty that people are expressing towards each other on Twitter and Facebook and is not the kind of cruelty you would extend to people if they were right in front of your face. And I truly believe that there is room to have conversations even when we don't agree. And I don't understand when that went away, but I would really love for it to come back.
I agree. So if people would like to learn more about you, follow you on social media, find out more about your coaching, how can they do that?
So people can find me online at www.birdgirlindustries.com. That's BIRDGIRL industries.com. And you can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at birdgirl1001.
All right, excellent. We'll put links up on our website as well. So, Melissa, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. This was really fun, and I hope people will check you out on social media. I think that we all need to do a lot more learning to use our voice in a positive way. So I really appreciate you modeling that for us.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Our theme song is called Are You Listening, off of the album Elephant-Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at twobroadstalk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.